Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to another table talk. Today's discussion is going to be about speed controllers. If you've been following my blog and my YouTube channel as of late, you know that I've been doing quite a bit of testing on a couple of different speed controllers that are new to me, both on the bench and at the field, with several different motors that I've been testing and also use in my planes. So, you know, the speed controller that I've been using for many years is the Turnigy Plush from HobbyWing. This is actually a version 3.1, so it's you know, it's a few years old. I probably bought this. I just took this out of the package, but I probably bought this 2 or 3 years ago. Currently, HobbyWing is selling version 4.2. There has been a change to the battery elimination circuit, but I don't know if there's been any change made to the processing and the way the speed controller works to allow the motor to maximize its performance. They're sold out right now at HobbyWing, but perhaps further down the line, when my my speed controller budget builds back up a little bit, I might pick one up and give it a try and see if they've done anything to improve the performance. But you know, like I said, I've been using this for a very long time. Super reliable. You know, in thousands and thousands of flights, I've only ever had one go bad on me, and that was because of essentially my own fault. A little bit of snow got up inside of it one time when I was flying in the winter, and then I think it shorted it out. But other than that, I haven't had a problem. So these are extremely, they perform really well, and extremely reliable for me anyway. So again, I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to shove a particular brand down anybody's throat or tell you that, you know, because what I found, you should rush out and buy a bunch of these speed controllers, or get rid of the ones you have and use something else. But so I discussed, you know, within the realm of testing all these quad racing motors that I've been testing, and I actually still have a few more to come to test. Mostly some very high kV, like 2700, 2800 plus kV motors to test. I had several discussions back and forth with RC Plane Pirate about some different speed controllers that, you know, I might want to try. Primarily not, you know, obviously not because the Plush were bad, because I've had, you know, extremely good luck with those, but maybe just looking for ways to perhaps optimize the performance of those smaller, lighter motors, you know, to kind of squeeze as much possible power out of them. So a couple of the speed controllers that we decided on, and again, you know, you've probably seen in my maybe in my videos or on the blog, are the HobbyWing Platinum PRO 40 amp speed controller. This one is I got this one from Banggood. And then this is the Turnigy AE45 amp speed controller from HobbyWing. Now RC Plane Pirate uses a Turnigy AE65 on his test rig for all of his motors, so that was one of the reasons that we got into that discussion. And also, I managed to pick these up. The HobbyWing right now, I think, is about $40 US, so it's a pretty expensive speed controller, especially for a 40 amp size. I managed to get mine a little bit cheaper, and I think they might have a special on them right now till the end of February from the US warehouse for about half price. But you know, if you can find one for cheaper than 40 bucks, definitely worth picking up, I think, especially for some of the higher end super high kV motors. So what I did find, though, is the nice thing about this Turnigy Plush for me, it doesn't have a whole lot of settings when it comes to performance. Like, you essentially have 3 timing settings. You can't really play around. It doesn't really have any sort of way to program pulse width modulation or anything like that, either through a programming card or the transmitter. But the nice thing about it is that 99.9% of the motors that I've run on the bench and at the field, they just like low timing, which is essentially the factory default. So the nice thing about that is it's essentially always just been a sort of a plug and play. You know, put it in, boom, away you go, and you're going to get reasonably good performance. Now, when I started testing, I got this Platinum Pro first, and one of the first things, one of the I guess advantages and perhaps at the same time disadvantages of this is it has a lot of different options for choosing settings. There's 8 different settings you can choose in the timing, and then 2 in the pulse width modulation. So the first time I tested this with a motor on the bench, I actually saw, especially at mid-range, I saw actually pretty, certainly not numbers that didn't impress me for, for an expensive speed controller. So I, again, had another conversation with RC Plane Pirate, and he recommended that, I might have to play around some more with the timing and the pulse width modulation. So I went through quite a series of testing, trying out different combinations of timing and pulse width modulation. So what I actually found with this one is that the factory default settings on this one for the bulk of the motors that I'm running, from 2212, 2200 kV motors, up through to, this is the Emax 2306 2750, which is probably the most powerful quad racing motor and the most powerful motor I'm using right now on 3S. They didn't like, none of those motors really liked the default settings on this. Pardon me. So what I found was changing on both of these, actually the AE and the HobbyWing, is as soon as I change the pulse width modulation frequency. Now this has a choice of 12 or 8, and 12 is the factory default. This one has 12 or 24 kilohertz, factory default again being 12. For both of these, as soon as I switched the pulse modulation frequency, it didn't matter what the timing setting was, the mid-range throttle performance jumped considerably. So that's one thing that if you're looking at using these in a park jet with a park jet style motor, looking at most of the literature on this HobbyWing, it may be designed more for using with helicopters. And I've also seen somebody in the comments on this Turnigy AE that they flashed it with BL Heli firmware, and apparently it worked much better. So I'm not planning on doing that with either one of my speed controllers. But what I did find was the highest timing possible, which was 26.25 degrees and 8 kilohertz on the pulse width modulation frequency, worked the best. And the motor that actually likes this the best is this motor, which is again the Emax 2306 2750. A lot of the other higher kV motors, that are close in performance to the Emax motor, and then some of the ones that are below 2700, there wasn't really a whole lot of, at high end, there wasn't really a whole lot of difference. Maybe about 5% increase in performance, which I guess it's an improvement, but again, you have to factor in, well, am I going to spend $40 on a speed controller that's only going to give me 40% or a 5% increase in performance? So I will probably, again, I've got some other higher kV motors on the way that may run well with this. So this will probably, this one will probably be saved for the really super, fast setups, speed setups that I want to put in a plane. So they're good that way. But good quality speed controller, no problems whatsoever. I would actually say slightly better. This one has with the custom timing and pulse width modulation frequency. I would say that this HobbyWing has just slightly better throttle response, like just a little bit faster. I mean, not, as John Wayne once said, I wouldn't want to have to live on the difference, but I think it is noticeable there. So just slightly better throttle response, when you put the pedal to the metal, so to speak. But again, it's a $40 speed controller, so you would hope that it would give you that performance. But thus far, it's worked really well, and I'll continue to use it with the most powerful motors that I have, just to really push them, and optimize them for really super fast speed setups. So this one actually has been the Turnigy AE has actually been a pretty pleasant surprise. The default settings on this one actually, this is the old 2212/6 2200 kV motor, kind of the Park Jet workhorse, which I think everybody should probably have at least one of them in their supply bin if they fly Park Jets. This is the only motor that it likes the default settings the best. So again, this will be a plug and play. And the other nice thing is that if you were looking to buy a speed controller and set it up, again, I don't know what the 4.2 version 4.2 of the Plush is like, but this one it performs significantly better with this motor. I did actually a video where I flew both of these with factory default, and it actually flew with this motor, and the performance was actually noticeably better with the AE. Now the reason why that's kind of nice is this is actually just over $20. I can't remember the exact price, but it's just under $21. And right now I think that this Plush, the version 4.2, is around $23 or $24. So the thing is, again, I'm not trying to shove this down anybody's throat, but if you're shopping around looking for a speed controller, you're just getting into the Park Jets, or thinking about it, like I said, you're going to get better performance with the factory defaults with this 2212 2200 kV motor with this AE45 than you are with the Turnigy Plush 40, or at least the one I have. Again, I could be talking through my hat because I don't have a 4.2 to compare it to. So that's kind of nice, save yourself a few bucks. And the other thing is, if you're thinking long term, big picture, is because you have so many different selections in here for timing. Again, you have 8 different timing settings you can select, and 2 different pulse width modulation frequencies. If you're playing around with other types of planes or other motors or whatever, you've got a lot of flexibility to experiment with that. Now the tough thing is, obviously, I spent a few bucks and bought myself a proper thrust stand, and I have a watt meter, so I can see the numbers on the bench when I test it. If you didn't really have a thrust stand or a way to test the thrust of your power system, then it really might not, playing around with all of those different settings and stuff might not be advantageous, or might not be helpful to you, because, and quite honestly, if you have no way to test that, then you're probably best to spend a few extra bucks and just go with the Plush, because other than this 2212 2200 motor, factory default settings on any other motor that I'm using currently, the Plush has at its factory default has better performance than this one does. Okay, so moving on to the higher kV motors, it actually didn't perform the Emax motor here, the top of the line, the thoroughbred of the motors I'm using right now. It actually didn't perform terribly well with this with custom settings. I did find a custom setting of 22.5 degrees for timing, and the 24 kilohertz pulse width modulation frequency seemed to be the best for the bulk of the higher kV motors. I'm talking about motors from 2550 up to about 2700 and higher as well, except for this motor. I did a flight test today using the B-Rotor 2207 2780 kV motor from RC Timer, and I flew with the custom settings in this that I just mentioned, and a default in the Plush, and I really couldn't see any difference. So other than this Emax motor, most of the motors that I've tested in above 2700 kV, there has really been very limited amount of difference. I'm talking maybe 15 to 20 grams of thrust difference in performance. Now, there have been some times where there has been a fairly significant difference in amp draw. Like, for example, on today's flight using this one, it pulled about 3 more amps. But the speed controller can handle it, and I think so could the motor. But those are things that can happen when you're playing around with custom settings. On the bench, anyway, motors sort of below 2700, like 2600. I've got a 2650, a couple of 2600s, and 2550. They actually perform very, very well with this speed controller with the custom settings. So for the broad range of motors that I'm currently using, this works really, really well, but you need custom settings other than using this 2212, 2200. So it's, you know, it's a pretty good deal. It actually has, you know, I'll have links to several blog posts and write-ups that I've done on these already. As I mentioned at the start, I've done quite a bit of writing on my blog. The heat sink on it is the same size as the label here, so it's about 50% bigger than the heat sink on the HobbyWing or the Plush. So I would suspect that you can probably push it pretty hard. It's a 45 amp speed controller, so 5 amps higher than those other two, but it doesn't have a very high burst rating. It's only another 5 amps. It's got a burst rating of 50 amps, but like I said, it's got about 50% larger cooling heatsink than the other two do. So again, this has been a real bargain thus far. Now, you know, I'm talking maybe with couple dozen flights experience with these. So you know, initial excitement. You know, we could be disappointed. You know, months or flights down the line. So what I'm going to continue to do is I'm going to leave this AE type speed controller in the plane that I flew today, which is again, it's drawing you know, close to 38 amps with that motor. So I'm going to continue flying that, and you know, pushing it pretty hard. I'm obviously not pushing it to its max, but it's going to be getting pushed pretty hard. And you know, 100 flights from now or 6 months from now, you know, I'll come back and I'll do another review on how durable it is. Because like I said, the one thing that I like about the Plush is that they have just performed really, really well, and they've been super durable for me over time. So that's the only thing right now that I have to determine. But anyway, it's been very, very interesting. It's been very educational for me. Like I said, the tricky thing is, though, as you know, with all of these, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. If you have a thrust stand or a way to kind of, you know, measure the thrust of how your power setup is working, then you know the sky's the limit on playing around with timing and PWM frequency settings. If you don't really have any way to get any feedback on the differences in thrust, and there can be some fairly significant differences in thrust as you play with the different settings, then you know, these actually may be disappointing, because the factory defaults, you know, either that or you take me at my word and use the settings that I use if you use a motor similar to mine. But anyway, like I said, when I did experiment with it at factory default, the 2212, 2200 worked great with this one. This one didn't really work that well with any of the motors. So for some reason, it seems like 12 kilohertz pulse width modulation frequency, except for this motor, which I keep talking about, the 2200. None of the other motors that I use, they seem to like that pulse width modulation frequency of 12 kilohertz. Don't ask me why. I don't understand how all that stuff works. You know, again, I'm doing the test. I see the change in the numbers. I see the change in the performance at the field, and it tells me that they obviously don't like these smaller, higher kV motors I'm using in my park jets are just not happy at 12 kilohertz, at least on these two speed controllers. So there we go, folks. Like I said, lots of links down below for write-ups. You know, my initial impressions, my initial testing. You know, you can watch videos. I've had several ESC showdown and ESC comparison videos, flight videos now at the field. You know, seeing how these perform in the air, because obviously the bench numbers, you know, they don't always tell the full story until you get it out to the field and see how it responds. And you know, obviously bench testing doesn't determine how you know, really smooth the throttle setting is when you're slamming the throttle around, or whether the battery elimination circuit is, you know, going to handle 6 servos. I run 6 servos on all my planes, and so thus far I haven't had any problems with any of that. Touch wood. So like I said, I'll continue to keep flying these hard, both of these, and when I get to the sort of the 100 flight mark, or 6 month, probably the 100 flight mark, because then it's, you know, I will have put the time and put the flights through them to see how they perform. I'll write up or do another video on these two speed controllers. But anyway, lots of stuff down below to check out. Please don't hesitate to leave any comments or questions on the video, or on my blog on all the write-ups that I've done, or you know, any of the other flying videos. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to do that. And as always, you know, I'll have my emails on the blog site, scott.parkjet@gmail.com. Feel free to email me there as well if you have any other questions. So thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.